I thought the barbecue was just a vanity project until his ex-wife leaned in close and hissed that she was still the real wife. I did not argue. I simply opened my purse and pulled out the stack of papers my husband had signed with shaking hands 8 years ago. As I turned to the final page, I realized something terrifying. They were not just about to lose face. They were about to lose absolutely everything. My name is Harper Lane, and at 34 years old, I knew exactly what a crime scene looked like before the blood was even spilled. The backyard of our estate in Cedar Ridge was packed tight with the wealthiest social climbers in the outskirts of Austin, all of them sweating through their linen shirts under the Texas sun. This was not a party. It was a press conference disguised as a barbecue. The smell of smoked brisket fought for dominance with the scent of expensive cologne and desperate ambition. My husband, Grant Maddox, stood near the infinity pool like a king surveying his kingdom. He raised a glass of amber bourbon high above his head, his voice booming as he toasted to the two things he cared about least in this world. "To family," Grant shouted, flashing that practiced, shark-like smile that had sold 100 subdivisions for Maddox development, and to tradition. The crowd cheered, oblivious to the rot beneath the floorboards. I stood by the sliding glass doors, clutching my clutch purse with both hands, watching the performance. Then the real show began. Sabrina Vale did not walk into my backyard. She invaded it. Grant's ex-wife swept past the servers with the entitlement of a woman who had never been told no. She wore a red dress that was entirely too formal for a barbecue, a deliberate choice to stand out against the sea of casual pastels. She marched straight into the outdoor kitchen and snapped her fingers at the catering manager. "The ice is melting," she commanded, her voice loud enough to carry. "Rotate the stock. Now!" She turned to the guests, greeting Grant's biggest investors by their first names, asking about their children and their golf handicaps as if she had memorized their bios that morning. She was playing the hostess. She was erasing me in my own home. I saw Grant watch her from across the pool. He did not look annoyed. He looked impressed. I moved to intercept her, but she was faster. She cut me off near the large steel cooler tucked away in a blind spot behind the trellis. The music was loud here, thumping bass that covered the sound of voices. Sabrina stepped into my personal space, close enough that I could smell the tuberose perfume she had bathed in. She looked me up and down, her gaze landing on the diamond solitaire on my left hand. She sneered at it like it was costume jewelry made of glass. "You look tired, Harper," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "But I suppose it is exhausting playing a part you were never cast for." I held my ground. "If you are looking for more ice." "Sabrina, the staff handles that." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She leaned in until her lips were inches from my ear. "Enjoy the house while you are playing dress-up. But we both know the truth. I'm still the real wife." I felt the eyes of the crowd shifting toward us. Grant's friends, the ones who thrived on gossip, had stopped their conversations. They were watching, waiting for the young second wife to crumble or scream. I looked over Sabrina's shoulder and saw Grant. He was standing 20 feet away, swirling his drink. He saw everything. He did nothing. He wanted this spectacle. He wanted to see two women fight over him to stroke his ego in front of his bankrollers. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked Sabrina dead in the eye. "So what do you think?" I asked, keeping my voice terrifyingly even. The paperwork says Sabrina blinked, confusion flickering behind her arrogance. "Excuse me, I opened my bag. I did not carry a compact or a lipstick." I reached in and pulled out a thick document, bound with a heavy clip and marked with color-coded tabs. It was the prenuptial agreement Grant had forced me to sign 8 years ago. I had carried it with me every day for the last month like a fire extinguisher, waiting for the spark. "You think you are the real wife," I said, my thumb finding the neon yellow tab I had memorized. "Let us see if the state of Texas agrees." Sabrina let out a short, nervous laugh. "You are insane." Put that away. Clause 9. I read, ignoring her command. I held the page up so the bold header was visible. Prior marriage and misrepresentation. Her smile died instantly. It did not fade. It vanished. I did not look at her anymore. I looked past her, straight at Grant. He had stopped swirling his drink. For the first time in our marriage, the mask slipped. His face went pale, draining of color until he looked like a ghost. He stared at the document in my hand, and I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He had just remembered what he had signed. He had just realized that he had not just invited his ex-wife to a party. He had invited his own destruction. To understand why I stood there holding a contract like a weapon, you have to understand who Grant was 8 years ago. We met at a fundraiser at Stonewater Hall, back when I was still idealistic enough to believe that charm was a personality trait and not a hunting tactic. Grant Maddox did not just walk into a room, he curated it. He knew exactly which board members to flatter and which waiters to tip. He found me by the bar, and within 20 minutes, he made me feel like the only person in the room who actually mattered. He was seductive in a way that felt safe, like a heavy door locking the rest of the world out. He moved fast. We were engaged in 6 months. When he brought up the prenuptial agreement, he did it over a candlelit dinner, holding my hand across the table. "It is not about trust, Harper," he had said, his eyes warm and sincere. "It is about protection, for both of us, men in my line of work. We have targets on our backs. I need to know we are solid. I need clarity. I signed it. I signed it because I loved him, and because I wanted to prove I was not like the women he warned me about. But I was not naive. I had spent 5 years as a contract specialist at Northcrest Advisory before Grant convinced me to quit. I knew paperwork. I knew that a contract was only as good as its enforcement. So, the day after we signed, I took the original countersigned copy and locked it in my personal safety deposit box. It was a habit, a muscle memory from my old life. Then, the dimming began. It was subtle at first, like a dimmer switch being turned down so slowly, your eyes adjust to the darkness without realizing it. My career at Northcrest became too stressful for a Maddox wife. So I left. My friends were too loud or not our crowd, so I stopped calling them. Slowly, I became less Harper Lane and more Mrs. Grant Maddox, a polished accessory designed to reflect his light. Sabrina was the ghost that haunted the edges of our marriage. Grant always painted her as the villain. She was the crazy ex, the mistake, the woman who had tried to use him. But whenever her name came up, Grant did not act like a man who was over it. He acted like a man who was afraid. He would stiffen. His jokes would get a little too loud. "She is just history," he would say, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. Do not let her get in your head, but the math did not add up. About 3 years into the marriage, I started noticing the gaps. It was small things at first. A credit card bill that never arrived at the house. A new account number on a statement I was not supposed to see. Regular cash withdrawals that were just below the reporting limit. When I asked him, Grant would sigh, put on his reading glasses, and drown me in jargon. "It is just capital leverage for the new zoning permits. Harper," he would say, his tone patronizingly sweet. "You do not need to worry about the plumbing. Just enjoy the house." I almost believed him until the morning I saw the email. It was 6 months ago. His iPad was open on the kitchen island. A calendar invite popped up for a site review at a location I knew Grant had no projects in. In the contact field, it did not say a contractor's name. It said Sabrina V. I stared at it, my coffee cup freezing halfway to my mouth. I blinked, and 10 minutes later, when I walked back into the room, the invite was gone. Deleted. I did not confront him. That was the old Harper. The new Harper, the one who had learned to read the silence between his lies, understood something vital. If you ask a liar a question, you give them a chance to invent a better lie. I stopped asking about his late nights. I stopped complaining when he went on scouting trips on weekends. I let him think I was the perfect, docile wife he had molded. But in the quiet hours while he slept, I was awake, thinking about that document in my safety deposit box. I realized I had not brought the prenup to the barbecue to protect myself. I had brought it because I was finally ready to push the button. The unraveling began with a piece of thermal paper no larger than a playing card. I found it tucked deep inside the breast pocket of Grant's navy blazer, the one he had worn for his crucial site survey in Dallas. It was a receipt for a 3-night stay at a luxury cabin in Lake Cormorant. The dates perfectly matched the weekend he was supposedly inspecting concrete foundations 300 miles away. I did not scream. I did not throw the jacket against the wall. I placed the receipt on the kitchen counter, photographed it with my phone, and then slid it back into his pocket exactly as I had found it. That night, while Grant snored beside me, I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I named the file Renovations to avoid suspicion. The columns were simple date, the lie, the alibi, and the evidence. It was not a diary of a heartbroken wife. It was an audit. 2 days later, I sat across from Patty Sloan in a booth at a diner 2 towns over. Patty was a private investigator who specialized in high-asset divorces and forensic accounting. She did not look like a spy. She looked like a librarian who knew where all the bodies were buried. I slid a manila envelope across the table along with a retainer check. "I do not just want to know who he is sleeping with, Patty," I said, keeping my hands folded on the table. "I want to know where the money goes. Check everything. Every shell company, every offshore account, every hidden credit line." Patty nodded and took the envelope. "Give me a week." The report she delivered 7 days later was thick. The photographs were the first blow. Grant and Sabrina were not meeting in dark alleys or cheap motels. They were dining at open-air bistros. They were walking hand in hand through public parks. They were not hiding. They were living a parallel life, behaving exactly like a legitimate married couple. But the financial section was where the blood really drained from my face. Patty had traced a series of monthly transfers leaving Grant's primary business accounts. The money was flowing into a network of obscure limited liability companies. These entities were registered to names I did not recognize until Patty cross-referenced them. They were Sabrina's distant cousins. Grant was siphoning profit out of our marital assets and dumping debt back into his main company. He was essentially hollowing out our future to fund hers. Then came the digital smoking gun. I had access to Grant's old email server, a remnant from when I helped set up his office IT. I ran a keyword search for legal and status. Buried in his spam folder was an email from a compliance officer at his bank, dated 3 years ago. The subject line read, "Urgent verification of marital status required." The body of the email was polite but insistent. The bank flagged a discrepancy in his loan application regarding a prior marriage not legally dissolved. Grant had not replied. He had simply marked it as spam and deleted it. I did not go to a divorce attorney. Not yet. Divorce lawyers look for settlements. I was looking for an executioner. I made an appointment with Elliot Crane, the sharpest contract attorney in Austin. He was a man who viewed the law as a mathematical equation. I sat in his glass-walled office and watched him read my prenup. He did not speak for 10 minutes. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "You read Clause 9 regarding misrepresentation," Elliot said. "I did," I replied. "But look at Clause 12, he said, tapping the page with a silver pen. "Automatic assignment. If the primary signatory, your husband, knowingly misrepresented his legal capacity to marry at the time of signing, the contract acts as a penalty clause. It does not just void his protections. It triggers an immediate transfer of assets formed during the union to the aggrieved party as liquidated damages." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Are you saying," I started, my voice trembling slightly, "that if he was never legally divorced from Sabrina when he married me, the prenup gives me everything I am saying that if he lied about being single, this document is not a shield for him?" Elliot said. closing the folder. It is a guillotine. I drove home in silence, the hum of the tires on the highway sounding like a countdown. I thought about the barbecue. I thought about the way Sabrina had looked at me with that pitying sneer. I am still the real wife. I had thought she was just being cruel. I had thought she was trying to mark her territory, but as I turned into our driveway, seeing Grant's car parked next to the fountain he had bought with money he was hiding from me, I realized the truth. It was not an insult. It was a confession. The next 72 hours were not about marriage. They were about logistics. I treated my life like a failing corporation that needed an immediate restructuring. I walked into a bank across town, one where Grant had no connections and no golf buddies on the board, and I opened a checking account solely in the name of Harper Lane. I did not transfer large sums that would trigger alerts or questions. I moved small, irregular amounts, siphoning off my personal savings in tranches of $400 and $800. I downloaded 5 years of joint bank statements, tax returns, and investment portfolios, then uploaded them to an encrypted cloud server. I set the password as the name of the first dog we had together, spelled backwards. Grant would never guess it because he never actually walked the dog. Next came the corporate shell. I registered a limited liability company called Lantern Ledger. On paper, it was a compliance software startup for mid-sized firms. In reality, it was a ghost. I applied for a business line of credit using my premarital credit score, which was still excellent. To a casual observer, or an arrogant husband looking for a reason to dismiss his wife's intelligence, it would look like I was drowning in reckless debt. It would look like I was a liability. That was the point. I needed to look weak so he would stop looking at me at all. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed while Grant adjusted his tie in the mirror. I let my shoulders slump and pitched my voice up, sounding frail and confused. Grant, I saw something about interest rates on the news. I said, wringing my hands, "Are we okay? The numbers seem so big, and I don't understand how the leverage works." He smirked, catching my eye in the reflection. He loved it when I played the fool. It made him feel tall. "Do not worry your pretty head about the economy, Harper," he said, patting his pockets. "That is why I am here. You just make sure the brisket is tender for the party." While he slept, I studied the guest list for the upcoming barbecue like a general studying a battlefield map. I did not see friends. I saw assets in strategic positions. There was Marcus Thorne, Grant's biggest angel investor, a man who valued integrity over profit. There was Silas Webb, a corporate attorney who prided himself on ethics. And there was Linda Clay, the town gossip who could spread a rumor faster than a wildfire. I needed them all. I needed a witness, a judge, and a broadcaster. I turned the prenuptial agreement into a weapon of mass destruction. I went to an office supply store and bought color-coded tabs. I highlighted Clause 9 in neon yellow. I highlighted the signature page in orange. Then I took the evidence Patty had found the marriage record, the bank email, and the photos and sealed them in a stiff white envelope. I clipped it to the back of the agreement. It felt heavy in my hands, dense with potential energy. I made one final stop. I visited a notary public named Mr. Henderson in a strip mall office. I asked him to notarize an affidavit stating that the copy of the prenup I held was a true and unaltered reproduction of the original in my safety deposit box. "You want to certify a copy of a certified copy, Mr.?" Henderson asked, peering over his reading glasses. "I want to make sure. No one can say I forged a single comma." I replied. The stage was set. Grant wanted to host the barbecue to show off his success. He wanted to parade Sabrina around to feed his ego. He thought he was the director of this play. He did not realize he was just the prop. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror as I drove back to the house. I did not look angry. I looked ready. The cleanest revenge is not about hurting someone. It is about handing them a pen and watching them sign their own death warrant. The atmosphere on the patio had shifted from festive to suffocating. Sabrina was no longer just a guest. She was performing a hostile takeover of my life while holding a glass of Pinot Grigio. She stood in the center of the crowd, regaling a circle of Grant's oldest friends with stories from a decade ago. She laughed too loudly, touching Grant's arm with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. When she looked at Grant's parents, she didn't call them Mr. and Mrs. Maddox. Mom, Dad. She beamed, gesturing to the buffet. You two need to eat before the ribs get cold. I remember how Dad gets when his blood sugar drops. I looked at Grant. He stood by the outdoor fireplace, swirling the ice in his glass. He did not step in. He did not correct her. He was letting her clear the path, watching me out of the corner of his eye to see if I would crack in front of his investors. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to cry or scream so he could look like the long-suffering husband dealing with an emotional wife. I decided to give him a reaction, but not the one he wanted. I walked calmly to the center of the patio, dragging a heavy teak chair with me. The scraping sound of wood against stone cut through the chatter like a knife. Conversations died out one by one. I placed the chair right next to the main serving table, beside the silver tray of expensive beef. I did not sit. I placed the thick, tabbed binder of the prenuptial agreement on the seat. It looked stark and clinical against the backdrop of the party. The silence was total. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into the background. Sabrina let out a short, incredulous laugh. She swirled her wine, looking at the guests with a conspiratorial smirk. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Embarrassing yourself is one thing, but boring us is another. You think those papers save you?" I said nothing. I just kept my hand on the binder. Sabrina took a step closer, emboldened by my silence. "Grant told me everything. He signed that when we were still—" She stopped. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized her mouth had moved faster than her brain. She clamped her lips shut, but the sentence hung in the humid air, unfinished and radioactive. I pounced. "Still," what I asked, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the yard. Sabrina blinked, looking toward Grant for help. "Nothing. I meant when we were young." "No," I said, opening the binder to the page I had marked with the neon yellow tab. "You said still, as in, still married." Grant started moving toward me, his face flushing a dark, angry red. "Harper, enough. Put that away." I ignored him. I looked at Silas Webb, the corporate attorney standing near the cooler. He was a man who understood the weight of words. Clause 9. I read aloud, my voice steady. If the signatory knowingly misrepresents their marital status at the time of execution, all protections regarding separate property are voided. Furthermore, any assets generated during the union are subject to automatic reallocation as per the attached schedule. I looked up. Silas Webb was staring at Grant. His face had gone pale. He whispered to the man next to him, "Prior marriage not dissolved. If that is true, the contract cannibalizes itself." Grant lunged. He reached across the table and snatched the binder from the chair, clutching it to his chest like he could physically smother the truth. "This is insane," Grant shouted, his composure shattering. "She is drunk. This is a private matter. I did not fight him for the binder. I didn't need it." I reached into my purse and pulled out the sealed white envelope, the one containing the notarized copy and the evidence from the private investigator. I turned to Marcus Thorne, Grant's biggest investor, who was watching the scene with narrowed eyes. "Mr. Thorne," I said, extending the envelope. "Since Grant is destroying documents, I believe you should hold on to the certified copy." Marcus took the envelope. He looked from me to Grant, his expression hardening. He did not give it back to Grant. Sabrina rushed forward, her hand reaching out to claw the envelope away from Marcus. "Give me that. You have no right." I stepped in her path, blocking her. I leaned in close, so only she and Grant could hear the final twisting of the knife. "You didn't have to admit it," I whispered, "but you just confirmed what I needed." The heavy oak door of the study slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. Grant was pacing the length of the Persian rug, his face slick with sweat and his hands shaking with rage. He spun around and pointed a finger at my chest. "You are psychotic," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what you just did out there? You humiliated me in front of the people who fund our lives. I will sue you for slander. Harper. I will drag you through court until you cannot afford a pack of gum." "You made all that up." I stood by the bookshelf, my pulse terrifyingly steady. I did not scream back. I did not defend myself. I simply looked at him with the clinical detachment of a pathologist examining a tumor. "Grant," I said, my voice quiet, "do you have the divorce papers with Sabrina?" He froze. For a split second, his eyes darted toward the wall safe behind his desk before snapping back to me. "Of course I do," he snapped. "Show me." I said, "Right now." He scoffed and turned away to pour himself a stiff drink from the crystal decanter. "Do not be ridiculous. They are archived. They are with my old lawyer in Houston. I am not digging through storage boxes in the middle of a party just to satisfy your paranoia." My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was a message from Sabrina. The text read, "You do not understand how the adult world works. Sweetie, leave it alone before you get hurt." Below the text was an image attachment. It was a blurry, poorly lit photo of a legal decree, stamped and signed. I forwarded the image immediately to Elliot Crane without a word. "Who are you texting?" Grant demanded, taking a sip of whiskey. "Your mother." "Tell her she can come pick up your things tomorrow." My phone vibrated. It was Elliot, I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "I am looking at the photo," Elliot said, his tone dry and professional. "It is a forgery. Harper. And a bad one." "Explain," I said. 3 distinct errors. Elliot listed, "First, the case identification number format is wrong for Travis County. They use a dash, not a slash. Second, the judicial seal is misaligned with the signature block. And third, look at the date stamp. October 12th, 2014. That was a Sunday. Courts are closed on Sundays." I hung up. The coldness in my chest spread to my fingertips. This was not just a cheating husband trying to keep his ex-mistress happy. This was a long-term, calculated fraud. They had manufactured legal documents to maintain a lie. Grant turned to me, his lip curling into a sneer. He mistook my silence for fear. He thought he had won. You know what he said, stepping closer to loom over me. "I am done. I want a divorce. Immediately. And do not think I don't know about your little side project. I know about Lantern Ledger. I know you are drowning in business debt. I will expose it all. I will make sure the banks know you are insolvent. I will leave you with nothing." He thought he was holding an ace. He did not know he was holding the card I had forced him to pick. He thought my debt was a weakness. He did not realize it was the trap. "Okay," I said softly, letting my shoulders slump. Grant blinked. "What?" "Okay," I repeated, looking down at the floor as if defeated. "Let us get a divorce. Just, please do not ruin my credit." He exhaled, and his entire posture changed. The panic vanished, replaced by the arrogance I knew so well. He smiled. "Smart girl. We will do this my way. You sign what I tell you to sign. And maybe I will let you keep the sedan." He sat down at his desk, pulling out a legal pad to start listing his demands. He was already calculating how much he could keep. He was already spending the money he thought he was saving. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from Elliot. It was short, but it hit with the force of a wrecking ball. "I just ran a verification check on the vital statistics database in the county clerk's office. There is no record of a final decree ever being filed for Grant and Sabrina. The petition was dismissed for lack of prosecution." I looked up at the man I had lived with for 8 years. He was writing numbers on a pad, planning to strip me of everything, but he did not understand the reality of the situation. Grant Maddox was not divorcing me. He could not divorce me because, legally speaking, He had never actually been single when he married me. I did not light a match. I simply poured the gasoline and let gravity do the rest. The morning after the barbecue, I sat in Elliot's office and authorized a formal request to the clerk of the county for a certified verification of marital history. It was a silent administrative missile, launched without fanfare. At the same time, I logged into the whistleblower portal of Grant's primary lender. I did not write a sob story about a cheating husband. I uploaded a zip file containing the limited liability company transfer records, the matching dates, and the suspicious invoices. I hit submit and went to get a latte. By Tuesday afternoon, the dominoes began to click against one another. Grant came home early, his face the color of ash. His phone was glued to his ear. I heard him shouting about liquidity crunch and standard compliance checks from the foyer. The bank had frozen a $3 million draw for his new high-rise project. They were not accusing him yet. They were just asking questions he could not answer without incriminating himself. Sabrina realized the ground was shifting. She did what people like her always do when cornered. She attacked the victim's character. My phone started blowing up with notifications. She was telling anyone who would listen at the country club, in group chats, at the salon, that I was a gold digger who had staged the scene at the party to steal Grant's hard-earned money. She spun a tale about me being mentally unstable and jealous of their deep friendship. I did not post a defense on Instagram. I did not cry to my friends. I opened a blank document and created a timeline. Date, time, event, document reference. It was boring. It was dry. It was bulletproof. I was not preparing for a debate. I was preparing for a deposition. On Thursday, the courier arrived at Elliot's office. The response from the county clerk was brief, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. Regarding the case of Maddox versus Vale, the search returned a result that made the air leave the room. No final decree found. The original petition for divorce filed 10 years ago had been dismissed due to a lack of prosecution and a procedural error regarding the service of papers. They had never refiled. Elliot looked at me over the top of the paper. This means your marriage is likely void ab initio, Harper. Legally, it never existed because he was not free to marry you. I felt a wave of nausea. But Elliot raised a hand. However, the prenuptial agreement survives as an independent contract because he triggered the misrepresentation clause. The penalty provisions apply regardless of the validity of the marriage. He owes you the assets not as a wife, but as a creditor he defrauded. And since he lied about his capacity to marry, the fraud damages are significant. Grant smelled the smoke. That evening, he found me in the kitchen. He was not shouting anymore. He was using his salesman voice smooth, desperate, and oily. He slid a piece of paper across the island. It was a settlement offer, the condo in downtown, the Mercedes, $200,000 in cash. We can end this tonight. Harper, he said, trying to catch my eye. Just sign this. We annul the marriage quietly, and you walk away with a nice nest egg. No lawyers, no mess. You do not want the stress of court. I looked at the offer. It was a bribe to keep his secret. It was an insult. I looked up at him. No. His face tightened. You are being greedy. I am being thorough. I replied, I do not want your car. Grant, I want a judge to tell you exactly what you are worth. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him staring at the paper. I called Elliot from the hallway and told him to file the suit. I did not want a gift. I wanted a verdict. The fictional district court of Harrow County smelled of floor wax and old mahogany, a scent that always reminded me of waiting rooms and bad news. Grant walked in like he owned the building. He was flanked by 3 attorneys in bespoke suits, a phalanx of expensive wool and silk designed to intimidate. He looked rested, confident, and utterly unbothered. I walked in alone, wearing a simple charcoal suit and no jewelry. I did not want to look like a wife fighting for a payout. I wanted to look like a serious person correcting an accounting error. The proceedings began with a predictable assault on my character, Grant's lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel. spent the first hour painting me as a financial disaster. He projected slides showing the credit lines I had opened for Lantern Ledger. "Your Honor," he boomed, gesturing to the screen. "Ms. Lane is currently carrying over $80,000 in unsecured business debt for a company with zero revenue. She is reckless. She is insolvent. This lawsuit is nothing more than a desperate attempt to liquidate her husband's assets to cover her own failures." I sat with my hands folded in my lap. I let him talk. I let him build the image of Harper Lane, the drowning woman. It was exactly what I wanted him to do. When he finally sat down, looking triumphant, Elliot Crane stood up. He did not raise his voice. He simply approached the bench. "We are not here to discuss my client's business ventures, Your Honor," Elliot said. "We are here to enforce a contract, specifically Clause 9 of the prenuptial agreement regarding the misrepresentation of marital status." The judge, a stern woman named Judge Hallowell, adjusted her glasses. "Proceed." Elliot handed over the certified letter from the county clerk. Exhibit A. A diligent search of county records reveals that no final divorce decree was ever entered for Mr. Maddox and his previous partner, Ms. Vale. The case was dismissed for lack of prosecution 10 years ago. The courtroom went quiet. Grant shifted in his seat, but his lawyer was up in a flash. "Objection," the lawyer said smoothly. "This is clearly a clerical error on the part of the county. My client believed in good faith that the divorce was finalized. A missing piece of paper does not prove malicious intent to defraud." Judge Hallowell looked at the document, then at Grant, then back at the document. She pursed her lips. "This is a serious allegation," she said. "However, without more evidence of intent, I am hesitant to trigger a penalty clause of this magnitude based solely on a potential administrative filing error. I am going to reserve my ruling and grant the defense 7 days to produce a certified copy of the final decree or an affidavit from the original presiding judge." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. 7 days. That was enough time for Grant to move money, hide assets, or bribe a clerk. Grant leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. He smiled at me, a small, pitying smile. He thought he had dodged the bullet. The bailiff called for a recess. We moved into the hallway, the marble echoing with the sound of footsteps. Grant dismissed his lawyers and walked over to me near the water fountain. He looked down at me, his eyes cold and victorious. "You tried," he whispered, leaning in close so no one else could hear. "I will give you that, but you are out of your depth, Harper. You will not get anything. You are just a mistake I am finally correcting." He straightened his tie and turned to walk away, confident that the world was still bending to his will. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected a spam notification or a message from my mother. Instead, it was an encrypted alert from the internal compliance channel I had tipped off. It was a forwarded automated notice from the bank's fraud department. Alert account ending in 4092, registered to S. Vale LLC, has been frozen effective immediately. Reason submission of fraudulent identification documents detected during audit. I stared at the screen. Grant thought the judge's delay was his salvation. He did not realize that while he was arguing about administrative errors, the bank had just confirmed that the paperwork wasn't missing. It was fake, and now the money trail was locked down. I watched Grant walk toward the elevator, and for the first time that day, I smiled. He thought he had 7 days. He did not even have 7 minutes. The bank audit was not just a red flag, it was a smoking gun. Elliot Crane subpoenaed the account opening documents for the shell companies, and what came back was devastating. The paperwork Sabrina had submitted to open the accounts did not just list her as Grant's wife. It included a signature from Grant authorizing the joint venture, but the signature was shaky, a poor imitation. She had forged his consent to siphon his money, using their ambiguous marital status as the key to the vault. I did not go to the press. Gossip fades, but professional ruin is permanent. I sent my detailed timeline, attached with the forged bank documents and the court dismissal records, to exactly 2 people. First, I sent it to Marcus Thorne, the investor whose millions were currently frozen. Second, I sent it to Silas Webb, the most ethically rigid attorney in the state. I knew Marcus would be furious about the money, and Silas would be furious about the fraud. They were not gossips. They were amplifiers of truth. By noon, the narrative in the business community had shifted. I was no longer the jealous wife. I was the whistleblower. The courtroom was freezing when we returned, but Grant was sweating. He expected a procedural argument. Instead, Elliot called a witness that made Grant's legal team scramble. It was a young woman named Jessica, Sabrina's former personal assistant. She walked to the stand looking terrified, clutching her purse. We had secured her cooperation in exchange for a request for civil immunity regarding the document filing. She took the oath, her voice trembling. "Did Ms. Vale instruct you regarding the divorce papers 10 years ago?" Elliot asked. Jessica nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, she told me to file them in the wrong jurisdiction. She knew they would be rejected." "Did she explain why Elliot pressed?" Jessica looked at Grant. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly open, his face draining of color. "She said—" Jessica hesitated, taking a shaky breath. "She said to keep Grant tied to her. She told me that as long as they were legally bound, she would always have leverage over him. She said he was her retirement plan." The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at Grant. For the last 8 years, he thought he was the king, the one keeping Sabrina on the side, the one in control. In that moment, he realized he had never been the player. He was the mark. Sabrina had not been pining for him. She had been blackmailing him with a marriage he thought was over. Judge Hallowell leaned forward, looking down at the defense table over her spectacles. "Mr. Maddox," the judge said, her voice sharp, "this court is now looking at potential criminal fraud and perjury. If Clause 9 regarding misrepresentation is activated, along with the evidence of financial malfeasance, I am inclined to view the asset transfer schedule in the prenuptial agreement as a necessary restitution." The gavel banged for a recess. Grant cornered me near the vending machines. He looked wrecked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, animalistic fear. "Harper, please," he begged, his hands reaching out but stopping short of touching me. "We can fix this. I did not know she did that. I was a victim too. Let us settle. 50-50. I will give you half of everything, right now. Just stop the bleeding." I looked at him. He still thought this was a negotiation. "No," I said. Why, he hissed, his eyes wide. "You win. Take the deal. You chose the stage." "Grant," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "Now you have to stand in the lights." When the court reconvened an hour later, the defense table had an empty chair. Sabrina was gone. Her lawyer whispered something to the bailiff, looking flustered. She had fled town, likely halfway to the airport, leaving Grant alone to face the judge, the bank, and the investors. He sat there, isolated in his expensive suit, realizing he was about to take the fall for both of them. I sat back down and opened the binder on my lap. I turned to the very last tab, the one Grant had laughed at years ago because he said it was unnecessary legalese. The header read, "Automatic assignment upon trigger." I ran my finger over the text. It gave me the right to seize control of any asset entangled in a fraudulent claim. It was not just about getting paid. It was about taking the keys. The checkmate had been written on page 42 all along. Judge Hallowell did not bang her gavel with theatrical force. She simply set it down, sealing the fate of the man who had underestimated me for 8 years. The ruling was swift and surgical. The court found that Grant Maddox had knowingly misrepresented his marital status at the time of signing our prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, the discovery of the fraudulent documents linked to Sabrina Vale triggered the automatic penalty provisions. The court orders the immediate activation of Clause 9. Judge Hallowell stated, her voice echoing in the silent room. All assets acquired during the period of the void marriage, including the equity in Maddox Development and the Cedar Ridge estate, are hereby assigned to Ms. Lane as liquidated damages. Additionally, Mr. Maddox is ordered to pay all legal fees for the plaintiff due to bad faith conduct. Grant sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. But the real blow came when the financial reality hit him. The bank representative, who had been observing from the back row, stepped forward to inform the court that Grant's assets were cross-collateralized. He had signed loans against his properties to fund his lifestyle and Sabrina's shell companies without reading the terms. Now that the fraud was exposed, the bank was calling in every single note. He was not just broke. He was millions of dollars in the negative. Then came the murmur from the gallery. A bailiff whispered something to the court reporter, and the news spread like a ripple. Sabrina had been detained at the airport while trying to board a flight to Mexico. The charges were wire fraud and forgery. The devastating part for Grant was that his name was listed on her account paperwork as the primary beneficiary. Grant stood up, his face wild with panic. "Your Honor, I didn't know. She tricked me too." He spun around to face me, his eyes full of hate. "You set me up. You planned this whole thing. You knew about the debt. You trapped me." Judge Hallowell cut him off, her voice sharp. "Sit down. Mr. Maddox. Preparation is not a crime. Deceit is—" I stood up slowly. I looked at Grant, who was now trembling. I decided to give him one last truth. "You thought Lantern Ledger was failing because you saw debt," I said calmly. "You didn't read the contracts either." "That wasn't bad debt." "Grant, it was secured capital for software licensing contracts that activate next week. I didn't need your money. I was just waiting for the court to sign off so I could leave without you taking half of mine." The investors in the room, the men who had eaten at his barbecue, stood up and turned their backs on him. They walked out without a word. Grant Maddox was now toxic. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright Texas afternoon. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I took out my phone and sent a text to Elliot. "Lock every door. I do not want to go back." On the drive out of town, I passed the vacant lot where Grant had promised to build his new headquarters, the symbol of his empire. The construction fence was still there, but the colorful banner with his face on it was gone. In its place hung a stark white sign with red letters, "Repossessed." I laughed, a quiet sound that felt like air leaving my lungs after holding my breath for a decade. I thought about Sabrina's words in the backyard, about being the real wife. No. The real wife is the one who knows how to read the fine print and lives to see another day without them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Grant and Sabrina's downfall. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.